and welcome to the Chez podcast on Paris Underground Radio.
I'm Emily Monaco, fungus expert and professional consumer of cheese.
And I'm your resident wine expert, Caroline Connor.
And we both live in France, where wine and cheese are cornerstones of almost every meal, from the day-to-day to the extraordinary.
At Chez, we feature recipes submitted by home cooks like you and pair them with the perfect wine and the most complimentary cheese.
This week's recipe is a spinach, egg, and goat cheese crepe recipe from Becca.
Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca Boyd and I am an expat living in Lyon, France, as well as an entrepreneur, similarly to Caroline. And my company focuses on creating travel itineraries and coordinating trips for people who would like to come to France. It's a lot of fun to be living here in France and just discover new things on a day-to-day basis. And I really love being here. So yes, anyway, I am here to talk to you about a recipe. And the recipe that I have chosen today is a goat cheese, egg, and spinach crepe recipe. So crepe is the French way of saying a crepe in English. And I have chosen this recipe because it's easy, it's accessible, and there are minimal ingredients to it, not to mention it's delicious. So that is usually my go-to whenever I want to make a recipe, is that it needs to be easy because I don't have a lot of patience to wait to eat when I'm hungry. So this recipe is great because all you need is a little bit of buckwheat flour, okay, which is called sarrasin or blé noir in French. And what's great about this flour is that it is also gluten-free. So for all of you gluten-free or gluten intolerant people out there, this is a great recipe, easily accessible. And you just add water and a pinch of salt, and you mix the flour and the water together to get your batter for the crepe. So it's great, it's easy, and once you're finished making the crepe, okay, then you can just fry your eggs and add some goat cheese and wilted spinach to your liking, and voila, it's finished. So I love this recipe because you can eat it for lunch or dinner. It doesn't take very long. It's super delicious. In France, there's an abundance of goat cheese, so it's not a problem. And the buckwheat flour is very easily accessible here in France because, a little known fact, for the crepe, the savory crepes in France, they are traditionally, from the north of France in Bretagne or Brittany. And in Brittany, they make all of their savory crepes with buckwheat flour. So this is a really easy recipe to make, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
Okay, thank you, Becca, so much for submitting your yummy Frenchy crepe dish. Wait, crepe is not good. Thank you, Becca, for submitting your yummy Frenchy crepe dish. I love this kind of food. This is very French cooking. This is like what French people do. It's easy, it's fast, but it's healthy and still indulgent.
And it's naturally gluten-free, too, which is kind of fun.
Naturally gluten-free.
Well, okay, before we get into this, I will say I have one food allergy, and it is buckwheat. I'm like deathly allergic to buckwheat.
No, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
and I found out because first I ate Korean buckwheat noodles, but I was eating so many different seafoods I'd never had before that I assumed it was a seafood. And then I was in a tiny Breton village with some friends backpacking when I was 18 or 19 and ate a buckwheat crepe, which I found delicious. And then my whole face blew up and we had to strong arm a 16-year-old who was joyriding in his father's car to drive me to the fire station. So I don't eat crepes anymore. But this sounds delicious. And if I could eat crepes, I would eat this one.
Well, can you make a non-buckwheat crepe?
Yeah, I can. I think what I realized in that first crepe I had, and if I'd known it was going to be my last, I would have, taken notes or something, is that there's something really nice and nutty about the buckwheat flour sort of standing up to all of the savory components. Like usually in France, if you're in Brittany, traditionally, which is where crepes come from, the savory crepes, which they call galettes, are made with buckwheat flour, which has that kind of like nutty richness to it. And then the sweet crepes are made with farine de froment, which is made from wheat. And so they have like a more delicate flavor to them. But I can definitely and do make crepes with wheat flour and fill them with savory things. And if I were to pick a savory thing to fill my crepes with, it would definitely be some combination of cheese and egg, because I love like breaking an egg yolk and having it melt into the cheese and soaking that all up with the crepe. That's so delicious.
That's definitely one of the most decadent things. It's like this simple decadence, though. I
Simple
love it.
decadence, exactly.
And
Exactly.
a runny egg yolk. That's the best thing
Yeah.
in the world. And this is such a classic combo, like spinach and goat cheese. Just works.
Oh yeah, it works super well. The spinach has that like really lovely like irony kind of flavor to it, and still like a touch of sweetness. And I really like that with goat cheese. I think what's kind of fun when I take tourists around and do cheese tastings in Paris, and they're people who've come from the States and who are used to eating American goat cheeses, is they tend to be really surprised by kind of the subtlety of a French goat, because I think that goat cheeses in the US, and specifically the ones from Vermont, they can tend to be highly acidic. And that's not a complaint. I love me a like tangy goat cheese, but I think that by comparison, a lot of the goat cheeses from France tend to be a little more balanced. They tend to have this sort of quality that in French we call animal, which nobody likes to hear about. It's like an animal. Like it makes you think of a barnyard. It's like farmy. But it does have that like sort of mustiness to it, and kind of a balance between that lactic tang and kind of like a creaminess. So I think when you get all of those layers of complexity in a goat cheese, it's really easy to have a simple recipe like this, where it's literally just the cheese, the spinach, and the egg in a crepe, and you don't need anything else. It's just delicious.
Yeah, that does. Well, so that's the thing. What do we pair with this now?
Right. Well, first of all, I think, if we're thinking about the cheese, there's a couple of different ways that you could go with this, because you could go with something really sort of simple and fresh and light, like a crottin de Chavignol, which is like a goat cheese that you can sell or you can buy at a variety of different donenesses. And you can get a crottin that is so fresh that it's basically like weeping away on the cheese board, because it's like a day old. And that one's going to be so light and really quite mild, and almost like ricotta-y in taste. Like it's so mild and really just tastes kind of creamy. Or you could go, to something a little bit more done. For me, I actually kind of like the idea of going with something called a charolais, which is a barrel-shaped goat cheese that's a lot more solid than you might expect from a goat cheese. It comes from Burgundy. It's got like a pretty gray, like mottled rind to it. And then it's fairly solid. Like you need a sharp knife to get through it, but it has this really creamy, delicious balance between sweetness and acidity, quite a bit of funk. And I think if you were to cut like really thin shards of that and put that in the crepe instead of a creamier goat cheese, it would kind of melt into the hot spinach, and that could be really nice as well. So I think that it's really down to your personal taste in terms of goat cheese, which is really, all of these pairings are just down to personal taste, right? But I kind of like the idea of like a funky charolais instead of something super creamy for this.
Wow. That just sounds awesome. And I think, so in this case, we're talking about like a quick evening meal. We're not, or even lunch, we're not pairing a separate cheese with it. We're talking about the goat cheese that's going to go inside of it.
Right. Yeah. I was thinking like, it kind of reminds me of like when you would make like a tartiflette or something. It's like, do you need cheese after? Maybe not. Like you can have just a cheese, like cheese in your meal rather than a cheese after. I guess if you really wanted to have a cheese after, I would go for something super different. Like I would say like put a really, really light, fresh goat cheese in your crepe, and then have something like far more assertive, like almost, I don't know, like a Roquefort or something, just to be very different afterwards. Roquefort is so good.
It's my favorite. Well, for wine pairings, the obvious, the classic, and I feel like there's a reason for the classics, right? Would be a Sancerre, Puy Fume. And I'm trying to remember if we've done a goat cheese and Sancerre pairing so far.
I don't think we have.
Really? Because it's so, so classic.
It's such a classic.
And it's because, this like what grows together goes together vibes. And that is definitely applies here. Like a lot of goat cheese comes from that part of France, the Loire. And these are just really like crisp, minerally Sauvignon Blancs that have a lot of acidity. They're really light, they're really fresh, and they have a grassy thing. And it's the grassy thing that goes really, really well with vegetables, spinach, and with goat cheese.
And like you said, like, I mean, the Charolais is not a goat cheese from the Loire Valley, but we do have so much goat cheese in the Loire Valley. And that, of course, is because, we had mass migration of, Saracens, Moors, Arabs from the Arabian Peninsula through Spain, over the Pyrenees Mountains and up through France. And we're talking like, first jihad period, and they reach the Loire Valley and they aren't able to traverse the Loire River, and so they end up like camping on the lower banks of the Loire until Charles Martel, who is Charlemagne's grandfather, also a big fan of Roquefort, pushes them back out, and so they kind of abandon these goats that they've brought with them from the Arabian Peninsula, in the Loire Valley, and that's why we have so much goat cheese in the Loire Valley. So there's a reason, there's a method to the madness.
I love that. Well, I'll tell you, that's great. That's a really fun bit of history. And I'll tell you another fun bit of history is that, the Loire was really devastated by phylloxera, which was the little bug that killed it. It was a great pandemic, basically, except it was a little bug that killed all the vines all over the world in the late 1800s. And basically, that used to be an area where they grew a ton of Pinot Noir. And there still is a tiny bit of Pinot Noir in Sancerre, a little bit. But basically, in the aftermath of phylloxera, when we realized that grafting works and we were replanting, they chose to plant Sauvignon Blanc, which had come from Bordeaux, because it was just more resistant to phylloxera.
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
Yeah. So even though obviously it's an ancient wine growing region, Sauvignon Blanc was not the grape that came from here. Really, I mean, this is a 20th century thing.
It's so funny how like devastating things like phylloxera can completely change the way that we perceive the wine industry in France today. It's baffling. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. And now, back to Chez.
I think one of the things that I love about wine, but also find frustrating, is there's a lot of like talk and just narratives about like the way things have always been and blah, blah, blah. And it's just total BS. Like, it's just not true. Like, there is no way things have always been. The modern wine industry emerged out of the ashes of phylloxera, World War I and World War II, and like the Industrial Revolution before that. Like, the wine industry has always been changing and in flux, and there are no always and nevers, it's something that I find really exciting to fully, because I understand that, but frustrating because we're really fighting against a lot of narratives about the way things are and how things have to be in a box. Even like when we talk about packaging, like people that turn their nose up at box wine and can wine, and they're like, oh, wine belongs in bottles. It's like bottles have not always been like, modern bottles are an Industrial Revolution invention. Before that, wine was served out of barrels into jugs. Before barrels, which were, what the Gauls used to put their beer in, then the Romans were transporting wine in clay. Like, there is no always never. There just isn't. And so I think if we can all kind of accept that, we'll be a lot more open-minded about our wine choices.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's exciting to see, there are a lot of winemakers in France who are kind of deviating from those norms of the strict AOP and sort of embracing Vin de France characteristics, whereas Vin de France, in the past has always been a stigma and like, if it's Vin de France, it's table wine and it's swill. I mean, no. It doesn't have to be. It can be anything. It can be, you can have really exciting producers working outside of the AOP norms, and you can have AOP producers who are not making very interesting wines. It's a big, wide range of chaos and delicious chaos.
I love it. Love it. Delicious chaos. That's the name of my book.
Yep. That seems on brand for you.
Perfect. I choose the cheese. The cheese I chose for you.
The cheese I chose. I choose my cheese.
I choose my cheese.
I choose my cheese. I choose my cheese with this crepe. I mean, I will choose any cheese.
Oh, I love cheese.
Me too.
I had a cheddar bacon biscuit for breakfast this morning.
Oh, Very American. Sounds heavenly.
It was good.
I'm in America right now as well, and there is a big cream cheese shortage in New York, and I don't know how I'm gonna survive.
Oh yeah, I heard about that. But what does that actually mean on the ground? Like, can you really not get a bagel?
I think it means that I have to make my bagel at home, which is fine because I feel like somehow in my absence, everyone thought it was appropriate to make bagel sandwiches cost $13, whereas a bagel you can still get for 99 cents. So I'll be buying bagels and assembling them at home.
That's pretty funny because I'm going to be in New York next week, and I think I'm just going to go pay $13 for a bagel. It's worth it.
What is your favorite bagel spot?
Oh, I don't know. Whenever I'm there, I just Google it and try to go somewhere good. And I mean, it's all better than what I'm used to. There are no good bagels in Lyon, unfortunately. I bet Paris has a couple good bagels, but Lyon, I have not had a single good bagel.
It's just round bread in most places with a hole through it.
Yeah, there's a place in my neighborhood called Best Bagels, and it's the worst bagels.
It's a lie. It's a lie.
It's a lie, but they do have Reese's, so I go in there anyway.
Oh my God, I have so much Reese's that I'm bringing back to America. Reese's and cinnamon flavored candy.
Ooh, yeah. I smuggle Annie's mac and cheese and Reese's. That's what I smuggle back. And fancy sprinkles. We don't have good sprinkles in France. The sprinkle scene in France is actually really, really, really pathetic, and it like makes me angry. But so I smuggle sprinkles and yeah, Annie's mac and cheese, Reese's, stuff like that.
So listeners, the next time you go to Lyon to take a wine class from the lovely Caroline, make sure that you bring fancy sprinkles with you.
Yes, I would like a tribute of fancy sprinkles. I like sprinkles. I like baking. I like American baking. I moved to France. All I want to do is bake American birthday cakes.
I like birthday cakes. I like birthday pie. I was a birthday pie kid, but I have a June birthday.
Oh, really? No, I love a birthday cake. Well, thank you so much, Becca. Yeah, Becca, thank you so much for your crepe recipe. I appreciate you. And we should make crepes and drink it with some Sauvignon Blanc one of these days.
To learn more about the recipe featured today and to see photos of the meal, please go to parisundergroundradio.com.
To have your recipe featured in an upcoming episode of Chez, please email us at parisundergroundradio@gmail.com.
You can find me, Emily Monaco, at Emily_in_France on Instagram and Twitter.
And you can find me, Caroline Connor, at Wine Dine Caroline on all the things.
This episode was produced by Paris Underground Radio. The music is A Night Alone by Track Tribe.
For more about the Chez podcast and podcasts like it, please go to parisundergroundradio.com.
Thanks for listening, and bon appetit.